everybody, welcome to Homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video I want to talk about the final war, specifically the war against Israel, which includes the Battle of Armageddon and also the Siege of Jerusalem. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to kind of view that final event like this. This is from Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, and you have a gigantic army invading Helm's Deep, and it's really dramatic looking, and it just looks like, the apocalypse, essentially, the way that people traditionally think of the apocalypse. And while I can't say for sure whether this will be true or not, I tend not to think so. I don't think that we're going to be seeing something like this. And I had this idea of war and what a war actually is. And when we read these prophecies of this particular war, are they describing a singular war the way that we would define it today, nowadays? Like, oh, it has a beginning date, it has an end date. Or are they describing a much broader conflict? And so I want to explore that idea. And I'm not going to say one way or another because I can't do that. I'm not a prophet, neither are you. The only thing that we can do is wait and see. We'll only really know after the fact how things actually play out. So what I did is I realized, you know what, this entire conflict, ever since Israel became a nation in 1948, and actually a little bit before that, as I'll show you in a little bit, but from roughly 1948, when they became a nation state, until now, there has been a lot of deaths, a lot of wars, the way that we would define them, as well as smaller skirmishes and operations, and there's been terrorism, and there's been just a bloody conflict since the beginning of it as a nation. And I can't help but to think maybe this entire thing is the final war. So before I show you the numbers, because what I did is I added it all up the best that I could. I added up the death toll of all these different conflicts, including terrorist attacks, and I'll show you what I came up with. And I think that there could be something to this. So before we do that, like always, here's the update on the Flood the Earth challenge, where we're sharing the Book of Mormon. This is updated as of yesterday. It's been a crazy 24 hours for me, but that's why the video is late today. So this is updated as of yesterday. Excuse me. We're at 6,032 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared, 605 people that have joined the challenge, and we have a new baptism that's been reported, which brings us to 18, which is amazing. And it's perfect to go along with this video because I'm going to show you the actual comment. This is from Lizzieisms. She puts #flood. By the way, please always do this when you report a share of the Book of Mormon or missionaries or baptisms, because it helps me find your comments quicker. So she says, she says, my friend Heather, whom I shared a Book of Mormon with a few months ago, was baptized yesterday. Heart. As a little girl, she attended synagogue, so I can only assume that means that she is Jewish, or she's descended from, she's Jewish, right? She later became a Christian. Her mother's family immigrated here from Israel not too long ago. She is eager to get started on her family's temple work. She is very private though, so I won't share her full name or picture here. Thanks for inspiring me to give a Book of Mormon, Jared. You played a part in this. And that makes me so happy. I'd like to think that there's good coming out of this channel. I do my best, and I think the most important thing that's actually coming out of this channel is this challenge. It's hopefully motivating people, and I know what it is because some of you have said so. It's hopefully motivating people to share copies of the Book of Mormon that they otherwise would not have. That's why now that this has started, I can't stop. It has to go on forever until, I don't know when, until the end of my life, possibly into the millennium, if because there's still going to be missionary work there. So I have no idea where this ends. But good job, everybody. And congratulations to Lizzieisms and her friend, Heather. So good. So good. Okay, so back to this. Okay, so is it going to look like this? The final war, the siege on Jerusalem, which is the final phase of the war where Jerusalem itself, the city, is under siege. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure because this would be very, very obvious. Now, of course, this is like overly dramatic, but I think that some people have something in mind not too far off. Just instead of orcs and wizards and elves, instead of that, modern armies, in mass numbers, because the way that you read the scriptures, that's the way it sounds, right? And some of us are just very literal the way that we read the scriptures, and I guess that's okay. I don't think it's always right. But we also have to take into account. Oh, and by the way, before I get onto that, I was asked like how am I coming up with these thumbnail images recently? There's a couple different ways. There's Bing. You can go to bing.com and then you can go to the chat bot, or you can go to this website. I'll put a link for it in the description below. And you just type what you want and then it'll produce it for you. And sometimes you have to play around with the wording and do different things. But nowadays, there's all these different websites that create AI generated images. So that's what I've been doing. So there's Bing that is free. And depending on how you want to use it, you want to like make sure that you research it, because you can't just like take this and start selling these pictures um, as though you had created them. Like you can't like print these out and then go sell them like physical copies or anything like that. Remember, if you're a YouTuber, there's different things that you can do depending on the transformative nature of the images that you're using, and also fair use. So, but do your research on that. I'm not a legal expert, so just you research it. But there's this that you can use for free. Before this, before I knew that existed, I was using this. This is the thing that I paid $10 for. It's called Dream Studio, and as you can see, the results are pretty pleasing to me. Anyway, I think that they're pretty amazing, especially when it comes to these temples that don't actually exist. I hope that this is kind of like what the Millennium looks like. It would be amazing. But you can do all sorts of stuff. And again, it's not perfect. Like here's Christ with like wings, so you have to play around with it. But it's a really powerful and a really cool tool. So that's how I'm doing it, to those of you that have been wondering. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so why do I think that it's not going to be super duper obvious like this? Well, we have to reconcile that idea with what we read here in Matthew 24. So let's see what Christ says. He says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." Really quick, sorry. I know some of you just hate the tangents. I'm sorry. I just because there's always new people joining the channel. One caveat to that is what Joseph Smith said. Recorded in the words of Joseph Smith, and then also this was published in the Ensign, the August 2002 Ensign. Joseph Smith said, okay, did Christ speak this as a general principle throughout all generations? Oh no, he spoke in the present tense. No man that was then living upon the footstool of God knew the day or the hour. But he did not say that there was no man throughout all generations that should not know the day or the hour. No, for this would be in flat contradiction with other scripture. You see that? When you read the scriptures, you can't just go off on one extreme and ignore other things. It all has to fit together. It all goes together. There's not contradictions. There's only contradictions in our interpretations. So Joseph Smith says, no, that would be in contradiction with other scripture. And now he refers to Amos 3:7. For the prophet says that God will do nothing but what he will reveal unto his servants the prophets. Consequently, if it is not made known to the prophets, it will not come to pass. And then some people say, well, not even Jesus knows. Well, if you look in the Doctrinal New Testament Commentary by Bruce R. McConkie, he points out a Joseph Smith translation, and then he concludes, of course, Jesus knows when he's going to come. So anyway, that's not the point of this video, but that's an interesting thing to know if you didn't know. So, but of that day and hour no man knoweth, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now listen to this. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark. Life was just going on like normal. there weren't big obvious things going on where they're like, except for Noah himself trying to convince them, but there wasn't like big obvious things going on. And then it just happened. See, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken, the other left. The women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken, and the other left. Watch ye therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. You guys, if this is what's happening in Jerusalem, then I think we have a pretty good idea. In fact, the whole world, anyone that's even the least bit familiar with the Bible, is going to know that, oh, it's here. It's here. Okay. We probably within the next week, month, year, something like that. Okay, so that's why I feel like this doesn't work. It doesn't work. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what hour the thief would come, he would have watched. It would not have suffered his house to be broken up. And that's what we're trying to do on this channel. We're trying to like watch the news, watch things that are happening in the church. Therefore, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. Again, if we're seeing scenes like this, then I think it'd be pretty obvious, because we know that this is like the final thing before he comes to the Mount of Olives. He comes, he delivers Israel, right? Now, I have said that it's very possible that within like a week, huge war could break out in the Middle East, because we've looked at the wars that Israel has been involved in, and a lot of them are really fast. Some of them have been surprise attacks, like in the case of the Yom Kippur War. There's a bunch of wars and skirmishes and conflicts that only last like a week, so things can happen super fast. But as far as like there being a huge third world war, because that's how sometimes it's interpreted, a huge third world war going on, and then this invasion of Israel, and more specifically Jerusalem, is part of that bigger conflict. And it just, to me, it seems like that would be too obvious, and it wouldn't gel with this, that he's going to come as a thief in the night to those who are not watching, right? And I feel like this would wake up too many people that aren't watching, but they'd be like, whoa, this is crazy. So let's get into the numbers. So this is what I did. Let me break this down. I took all the wars and conflicts that I could find and put all the death tolls here, according to country. So these first three columns, the first one is those that have died in terrorist attacks. So these aren't necessarily associated with any given war or conflict. This is just always going on. So if you look at this column, like every single year, don't ignore this because this is part of 2012 right here. You see that? It's just I had to put two things right here, so there's an extra row. Every single year, going all the way back to 1934, that's before Israel became a nation. So from 1935 until present, every single year, people have died as a result of terrorism. Okay. In column D, and I have it this way because this is how it was listed from in the sources that I got this information from. So we have military losses in column D. In column E, civilian losses as the result of conflicts and wars. Okay, so these first three are Israel, and then we go into Palestinians, and then Egyptians, and then Jordanians, Iraqis, and for these first three countries or people, okay, let's just say people, Palestinians, Egyptians, Jordanians, I have those split in two because for some of these conflicts, they only have a low to a high estimate. They're not exactly sure. And so in the blue columns, I put the lower estimate. And in the red columns, I put the higher estimate. Okay. And then These other ones right here, Algeria, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Yemen, they have been involved in at least one war with Israel, but I wasn't able to find any information. So let me show you where I'm getting this information from. And I'll put the links for this in the description below. And by the way, we're going to talk about the UN, because that's another part of this. Okay, so for the terrorist casualty numbers, I get this from Jewish Virtual Library. There's this site that you can go to, which gives you the names and like a brief description of the incident. With the most recent going all the way back. And by the way, I'm supporting a fundraiser right now. If you go to the description below, a fundraiser for a recent terrorist attack victim who left behind a wife and 3 children. So please consider doing that. It's the first charity that I have listed in the description box. Okay. So you can go here and it lists out all the names and what happened. You can also go to this, which just reduces it down to the numbers. This is from 1920 to 2022. So I don't have anything for 2023, but there has been more since that time this year. And so I added all these numbers, and then I went to Wikipedia articles because this is the easiest way to do it. And it's not precise, but it doesn't need to be, because we were just looking for like a ballpark figure. And suffice to say that what I have on my spreadsheet is less. Okay, it's very, I think it's very, very conservative, because these Wikipedia articles, I don't think that they capture every single thing that's happened. I'm just focusing on deaths, not even, injuries or anything like that. So what I have is a really super conservative estimation of the casualties and losses from these conflicts. So I went to Wikipedia for Palestinian casualties of war, and then after that, list of wars involving Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and then Algeria. Even though they've been involved in war with Israel, I think it may have been the 6-Day War, I'm not sure. They don't have their casualties recorded here. So undoubtedly well, I'm not going to say undoubtedly, I have no idea, but they probably did sustain some losses when they joined in war against Israel, but it's not recorded here. If I feel like doing it, then I may search further and see if I can get those numbers. But as of right now, I'm not going to do that. Lebanon, they don't have anything listed for losses. Neither does Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Syria, or Yemen. So when we're looking at these numbers here, just know that there's all these different countries where I just don't have any data at the moment. And so I would say definitely what I have for the totals are conservative. Okay. What else was there? Okay, so there's that. So now you understand how I put this together. It's a very conservative and very incomplete estimate. I have it by year. You can see all the numbers right here. Now, if you scroll over to the right, you'll see the totals, and I have 2 totals. Again, these 2 totals would be based on the high and the low estimates. So on the low side, here's the Israeli numbers right here. And then here are the Arab numbers. And then combining this with the Israeli numbers, this is what I come up with. So on the low side, 64,512 on both sides have died. And then on the high side, 118,231 have died. How does that stack up compared to other wars? So you can visually, just picture it and see it easier. I went to this article. This is the list of wars by death toll on Wikipedia. I'm not looking at any of like the old wars. I'm going off of this section, which is modern, which is 1500 AD till present. These are wars with greater than 25,000 deaths. And so what I did is I highlighted if either of the estimates surpassed this war. And some of these have a high and a low figure. For example, this Aroko war, which is 125 to 142,000. So if one of my estimates surpasses the lower estimate, then I highlighted it just because there's potential that this conflict between Israel and its enemies is larger than some of these. So I'm just going to quickly scroll through. I'm not going to go one by one, but you can see that there is quite a few of these wars that this conflict is bigger than. Quite a few, actually. Just scrolling through. So there's quite a few. And then they have listed all the modern wars with fewer than 25,000 deaths. And you can see that the Six-Day War is at the number 3 spot. But taking it all together, obviously, the low end total is more than 25,000. So it beats out all these smaller wars right here. Okay. So I think that says something. I'm probably going to have to try and work on it some more, see if I can get some numbers for those other countries, because this would definitely go up. So this is going to be a work in progress. But you can see that this has been a major, long, ongoing conflict. And when we're thinking about the prophecies that describe this final war, do you think that the prophets would use terms like, well, there's going to be, this number of wars, and then this number of conflicts, and then this number of terrorist attacks? I don't think so. I'm not one to say, but if I were to guess, I would think that they would probably just like seeing this final conflict, the nation of Israel, and it's struggling against all these enemies, as just one big war that's been going on. So this is what I tend to think is going on. Later on in other videos, I'm going to collect all the different quotes that I can find in regards to the final war. I know Bruce R. McConkie, he painted a picture that was more along the lines of this. Maybe not quite like this, but if you go to Millennial Messiah, he talks about a great final war. So again, the best that we can do is stick to the words of the prophets and the apostles. In that case, I don't know. I don't know if he has it 100% correct, because I don't think that what he said necessarily goes against this idea, and there probably is one final phase. Maybe it flares up within a month or a week where suddenly maybe it does get pretty dramatic. But by that point, there's like no time really to repent sufficiently, to join the church. I guess there would be within a month, but you get what I'm saying. Just all of a sudden, things could come crashing down with this entire history of wars and conflicts going back to 1948. So the last thing that I want to look at really quick is this. This is also from Jewish Virtual Library. It's an article called United Nations Yearly Ritual of Israel Bashing. And what they do is they take these different, I guess they're resolutions, and it just shows like the history of how the nations of the world have voted against Israel, essentially, in all these. So this article seems to have been compiled sometime around the year 2015. So the range, or the resolutions that they have listed here, range from 2009 to 2015. Okay, but this gives us a pretty good idea, I think, anyway, regardless of what decade you're looking at. I don't think things have changed too much since Israel became a nation. So we're just going to look at the first several, including this one that has to do with Jerusalem. We're going to look at what these have to do with, and then look at some of the numbers. So the first one is, I'm going to zoom in, inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Officially called Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, this resolution fully supports the Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinians and calls for the committee to, quote, continue to extend its cooperation and support to Palestinian and other civil society organizations in order to mobilize international solidarity. Okay, this is where it gets a little mobilize international solidarity and support for the achievements by the Palestinian people of its inalienable rights and for a peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine. End quote. The resolution asks for full cooperation with the committee, which is needed in order to mobilize the international community and non-governmental organizations against Israel. Because that's really what it is. That's really what it is. So look at 2015, 102 for that, and then only 57 against. And then this number 8 is well, actually I don't know. Does it say up here? I'm assuming that this is against, this is for, and this could be like abstain or no vote, because that happens a lot from what I've seen in the United Nations. But if you just go down the line here, this number pretty much, it doesn't fluctuate a whole lot. It stays within that 100 to 110 range, essentially. The next one, Division for Palestinian Rights of the Secretariat. This resolution asks the Secretary General to provide the necessary resources to the Division for Palestinian Rights of the Secretariat so that it can carry out its work as detailed in the relevant earlier resolutions, and continues to make a useful and constructive contribution to the Palestinian people. It also asks the Secretary to request the full cooperation of the Department of Public Information and all member nations in order to reduce bureaucracy so the division can cover adequately in various aspects of the question of Palestine. It also calls upon world governments, okay, now look at this. It also calls upon world governments to annually support and organize observances of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people on the 29th of November. It's just like a blatant call out, okay, we all need to support Palestine. Continuing, in cooperation with the Permanent Observer Mission of Palestine to the United Nations. And you can see that the numbers are essentially the same as that first resolution that we covered. Okay, Special Information Program on Palestine. According to this resolution, the UNGA believes that the worldwide dissemination of accurate and comprehensive information about the Palestinians is vital to raising awareness about the Palestinian cause. So, again, they're basically taking the side. They would argue, well, no, we're just trying to be transparent. We're trying to pull out this information that nobody knows about. So, but I mean, come on. In light of all these other resolutions, it's pretty clear that the UN, by and large, is against Israel. The resolution also praises the UN Department of Public Information for contributing effectively to an atmosphere conducive to dialogue and supportive of the peace process, and requests the department's future cooperation with the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. It asks the department to conduct 6 separate initiatives, including organizing fact-finding news missions for journalists to the area, expanding its audio-visual material on the question of Palestine, and disseminating United Nations reports and information to the general world public. So in other words, you might call it a big PSYOP, a psychological operation, right? A propaganda machine or effort, right? And this one has even more support. Look at 155 to 7. And it's worse than previous years. The worst is 2011 with 168 to 3. If this is the against vote, and I think it is. Yeah. I mean, it is important to know all the facts, but is that really what's going on here, or is it propaganda? I don't know. I'll let you be the judge. Peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question. I'm going to skip down here. It implies that Israel No, I'll read the whole thing. This resolution illustrates the General Assembly's full-fledged support for the Palestinian cause and is rife with condemnation for Israel. The resolution states that a peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine is the core of the Arab-Israeli conflict and necessary for peace in the entire Middle East, and that Israel alone must take several measures to achieve peace with the Palestinians. So, in other words, not so much compromise, just that Israel has to be the only one that does something. It implies that Israel is fully to blame for the start of the conflict because of the illegality of Israeli settlements in the territory occupied since 1967. That's when that was the 6-Day War, right? It's referring to the 6-Day War, where Israel won the war and it conquered or annexed. Well, it came under control of large pieces of land, but significantly Jerusalem. And I think that that was a very prophetic year. And I think that that was supposed to happen because we've looked at the different wars that Israel has been engaged in, and we've realized that it's been pretty miraculous, literally, that they've won a lot of these wars. When you look at the numbers and the strength of each army, in the case of 1948, the War of Independence, Israel didn't really have much of an army or military. It's amazing that they were able to go against fully formed and at the time modern militaries from several nations, and they still won that war. So it's pretty clear to me that God has intervened, and it's been on the side of Israel. Now, as a church, I just want to remind you, just really quick, let's go to my quotes A through Z. Okay, where do I have it? I'm going to do Control F. Do not take. Okay, this is the state of Israel. This is something important to realize as we're talking about this, because I don't want to come across like that we're supposed to take a side. Okay, it's more like just let the Jews do what they're doing, and let it be between them and God. Let it be between them and God. As far as the church is concerned, this is our stance. This is from Howard W. Hunter. This is before he became prophet, and it's a talk given in a devotional called "All Are Alike Unto God." This is important before we continue. At the present time, we are engaged in a project of beautifying the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem by a garden in memory of Orson Hyde, an early apostle of the church, and the dedicatory prayer he offered on that site. By the way, we've covered this a lot on the channel. If you go to one of my playlists, you could go to my Jerusalem playlist or Judaism playlist or State of Israel playlist. It wasn't just Orson Hyde. There were others that followed that also dedicated the land. But I've talked about the BYU Jerusalem Center and the Orson Hyde Memorial Park. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. So just so you know. So, but he continues, it is not because we favor one people over another. Jerusalem is sacred to Jews, but it is also sacred to the Arabs. A cabinet minister of Egypt once told me that if a bridge is ever built between Christianity and Islam, it must be built by the Mormon Church. That's interesting. In making inquiry as to the reason for this statement, I was impressed by his recitation of the similarities and the common bonds of brotherhood. Both the Jews and the Arabs are children of our Father. They are both children of promise. You see that? They are both children of promise. Jews and Arabs. Now, the people that are more zealot-minded, those that are more rigid, that always take sides, it's always like, no, it's just us. No, we're on the side of the Jews, or, it's just Christianity. We're against the Jews, or whatever. That zealot type mentality should not exist. Our church is not a zealot church. Go to my vocabulary tab. We looked at the definition for zealot, and it's basically these types that are very black and white thinking. They pick sides, it's my side or your side. It's very tribal thinking, and that's not us. That's not the church. Both the Jews and the Arabs are children of our Father. They are both children of promise. And as a church, we do not take sides. I'm not going to read the rest of that, but you can always come here. This is under my quotes A through Z spreadsheet. If you're new and if you don't know, you can either copy and paste this so you can see the whole quote because the cell cuts it off because of the cell size, or you can click on the bar up here where you put the formulas and you can drag this down and then you should be able to see the whole thing. And there's even a scroll bar over here that you can move up and down. Okay, so you can do it that way. I have to do it that way because I have to make this view only. I can't let people have editing power, otherwise accidents could happen or whatever. So I have to protect my spreadsheets. Okay, so we don't take sides. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that these things aren't happening, that the world is maybe unethically and, under the influence of Satan against Israel. Okay, but we don't take sides. But we can still be aware that something's not quite right. And basically prophecy is being fulfilled. So it implies that Israel is fully to blame for the start of the conflict because of the illegality of Israeli settlements in the territory occupied since 1967 and of Israeli actions aimed at changing the status of Jerusalem. The resolution does condemn acts of terror against civilians on both sides, but draws a moral equivalency between suicide bombings that kill innocent Israel and targeted killings of terrorist leaders or extrajudicial executions. It also expresses grave concern over the tragic events of the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, which is the old city, that's where the Temple Mount is, since since the 28th of September 2000. And the continued deterioration of the situation, including the rising number of deaths and injuries, mostly among Palestinian civilians, the deepening humanitarian crisis facing the Palestinian people, and the widespread destruction of Palestinian property and infrastructure, both private and public, including many institutions of the Palestinian Authority. In order for a peace settlement to be reached, Israel must withdraw from Palestinian territory occupied since 1967. So that would include Jerusalem, the old city. Not Western Jerusalem, but the only part of Jerusalem that is sacred to everybody. In order for a peace settlement to be reached, Israel must withdraw from Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, resolve the refugee problem, and recognize the Palestinians' inalienable rights and their right to self-determination and the right to their independent state. And similar to the last one that we looked at, the numbers are even bigger than those first couple. 155 to 7. This one enjoys a lot more support. And then the last one that I want to cover has to do with Jerusalem itself. This resolution states that it reaffirms the United Nations belief that all legislative and administrative measures and actions taken by Israel, the occupying power, which have altered or purported to alter the character and status of the holy city of Jerusalem, in particular the so-called Basic Law on Jerusalem and the proclamation of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, were null and void and must be rescinded forthwith. So no, it's not your capital. And that any laws Israel imposes on Jerusalem are illegal and invalid. The resolution uses strong language when it states that it deplores the transfer by some states of their diplomatic missions to Jerusalem. And that's what happened under the presidency of Donald Trump. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And after that, a few others did as well. That was a major development. The Jews, the Israelis viewed it as so significant that they minted a coin. Let me pull it up. The Trump Cyrus coin. Trump Cyrus coin. Let's look at this one on Amazon. This is not a promotion. But here you have the temple. And I don't know. I'm assuming that this probably represents the third temple. And then on this side, you have the images of Donald Trump and Cyrus the Persian, who, after conquering the Babylonians, allowed the Jews to return from the Babylonian captivity and to rebuild the temple. So they did this, right? So that was major. Let's see, U.S. Embassy in Israel. I want to remind myself of like when it was moved. Let's look for the Wikipedia article. Embassy of the United States, Jerusalem, in mid-October 2018. The United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced that the embassy in Jerusalem would be merging with the U.S. Consulate General in Jerusalem into a single mission. So, effectively moving it from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The embassy opened at its Jerusalem location on May 14th, 2018, the 70th Gregorian anniversary of the creation of the modern state of Israel. So those are some interesting numbers. The 70th anniversary of the state of Israel on our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, not the Hebrew calendar. Very, I think, symbolic, very significant. And again, one of the many things that happened either in 2017 or 2018, which was the transition from President Monson to President Nelson. President Nelson became president of the church in early January of 2018. And so within the first few months of his presidency, this is what happened. This was significant. It's still significant. I don't know if this has like the other. No, I was hoping that it would have like the other countries that followed suit, because there were a few, I think, including Honduras. I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah. Okay, going back to this. So I read that because, in particular, the so-called Basic Law in Jerusalem and the proclamation of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel were null and void and must be rescinded forthwith. So in 2018, the United States decided to go against this, and they placed the embassy in Jerusalem. You know, because remember, this is as of 2015 at the latest, what we're looking at here. So just a few years after that, the United States went against that. In that any laws Israel imposes on Jerusalem are illegal and invalid. The resolution uses strong language when it states that it deplores the transfer by some states of their diplomatic missions to Jerusalem, like the United States would do just 3 years later, and asks them to withdraw immediately. According to the American Jewish Committee, when the Palestinian delegation changed some text in the draft resolution, the United States changed its vote from abstain to no, which was viewed as a major shift in the U.S. position regarding Jerusalem. Okay, so I haven't really adequately covered this entire thing, but it would take many videos. But my intention was, even though this is like a longer video, my intention was to give kind of a snapshot of this entire thing. The timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is part of the wider Arab-Israeli conflict. And I guess I'll just end it with this. Let me just read what it says here in Wikipedia about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It says, this timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict lists events from 1948 to present. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict emerged from the intercommunal conflict in Mandatory Palestine between Palestinian Jews and Arabs, often described as the background for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The conflict is in its modern phase evolved since the declaration of the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948, and a consequent intervention of Arab armies on behalf of the Palestinian Arabs. And then for the Arab-Israeli conflict, it says, the Arab-Israeli conflict began in the 20th century, evolving from the earlier intercommunal violence in Mandatory Palestine. The conflict became a major international issue with the birth of Israel in 1948. The Arab-Israeli conflict has resulted in at least 5 major wars and a number of minor conflicts. It has also been the source of 2 major Palestinian uprisings. So again, you know, it would seem to me that if a prophet from the distant past was going to describe this entire conflict, and here on Wikipedia and other places, it does kind of put the entire thing together instead of just simply looking at it as separate wars. It puts it together as an entire conflict, and I think that you could properly term this the greater war, the larger war. So big, a war so big that it has multiple major wars within it, and conflicts, and also smaller skirmishes and terrorist attacks. That's how big this war is, and that's how I view it. You know, you don't have to, but I don't think that we can't ignore it. And I think that we probably should consider the possibility. I feel like this falls in line much more with Matthew 24. For in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. And you have to watch for it. Would you really have to watch for it if World War III is going on and Israel's being invaded? I don't think that would take much watching on your part. Basically, everybody would realize the serious condition that the world would be in regards to the second coming at that point. And I don't think that a whole lot of people would be taken as a thief in the night if that were the case. So I feel like this fits the Arab-Israeli conflict, which includes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I feel like this is probably the final war, and it's been going on for a long time. And in an instant, things could just go haywire. Things could just go crazy, berserk, within just like a week. Ultimately, you know, you have to think back to. Sorry, I know I said I was going to end, but thoughts keep coming to me. You have to remember that with the Yom Kippur War in 1973, this was a surprise attack. It was a surprise. They decided to attack Israel on the holiest day of the Hebrew calendar, Yom Kippur, and Israel won. But why can't that happen again? I have noted in other videos that now with satellites and better intelligence capabilities, it'd be much harder. Well, it'd virtually be impossible, really, to move troops to the border without the entire world realizing it, which wasn't so much the case in 1973. Remember, Russia, as it was getting prepared to invade Ukraine, what they had to do in order to amass their troops along the border in preparation for the invasion is they claimed that it was just a large-scale military exercise. And my understanding is that the Russian troops did think that it was just an exercise until it became the real thing. So a modern nation state with a modern military like Russia isn't even really able to conduct a surprise attack. But, you know, like I said, things could just go crazy all of a sudden. We've seen a number of operations and things erupt just like all of a sudden. We were looking at, they don't have it listed on here yet, but this year they had Operation Shield and Arrow, which was really fast and furious. And there was talk of like, whoa, this could go really crazy, really fast. Thankfully, they were able to reach a ceasefire. That conflict mostly had to do with, it was mostly between Israel and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And if you'll notice on this list here, like in the early years of Israel, it was mostly Israel against these armies of these other nations. But in more recent times, it's transferred mostly to conflicts between Israel and these terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah. And now, whenever they update this, they're going to have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in 2023. If they put this here, I don't know. Excuse me. So, anyway, just my point is, it'd be hard to do a big conventional surprise attack, but maybe it doesn't need to be a surprise. Maybe just some event needs to be triggered that would make everybody go berserk, and then they would just go ahead and do it. And who's going to stop it? If it makes them upset enough, then maybe they'll just do it. Who knows? Just who knows? All I'm saying is that things can like get crazy really fast, and maybe we're not going to have 3.5 years of warning. I feel like that's also counterintuitive that you read that literally, that there's going to be 3.5 years, because then you could just mark your calendar and be like, okay, 3.5 years, and then Christ is going to come. I don't think that that's what those numbers are for. I think that they're symbolic, just like we studied, that they represent a time in which Satan is allowed to do his work, and in this case, a time in which the enemies of Israel are able to do their work, and fight against Israel, but it's limited, and then it's going to come to a head, and then that's when Christ is going to come. All right, so I hope I gave you some things to think about. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.